We've seen how entities can relate to each other. Now let's try organizing some data that we have here in entities into the entities and attributes that will belong to those entities. We'll also look at the relationship between them and how they might look in an ERD. So let me bring up, there we go. There is the data that we want up here. We have a file with this information. It represents church data. We want to place this data into a relational database, so we need to organize it into entities to begin with. Normalization, or putting the data into normal form, will come into play as we organize our entities. But what we want to focus on here is entity relationships and entity versus attributes for this activity. As we look at this data, what entities do you see? Entities being recognizable as concepts like people, places, things, events, etc. What I see here are members and the wards they belong to, and the missions that they've been on, and the callings that they have, and the ordinances that they've received. So let's start with members. We have two members here, Jared and Doris. So I'm going to place a table on here for members and call it member. And we want, of course, we want a primary key, and this will uniquely identify each ward member, and the church actually has one called record numbers. So I'm going to put rec num there, and we're just going to be throwing in data types, so I'm not going to talk much about those in this lesson. All right, which columns of the data would fit with members? Now, I know for sure that the first and last name and the date of birth definitely go with that entity, so I'm going to go ahead and add those for now. And I'm going to require those. All right. There's a start for our member table. Oh, was that at the date of birth? That would be a date. All right, there may be other attributes later, but let's start with those. So this is a good example of third normal form. So let's take a look at that table. Do all of these other columns that are not the primary key, so the non-key columns, do they really belong to that primary key? That's the question we wanted to ask with third normal form. Does the non-key attributes of first name, last name, and date of birth really belong to that record number? Do the values of Doris go with the record number? Yes. But if we threw something in there like the primary teacher, say this calling in there as part of the members table, does primary teacher only go with that record number? No, record number keeps track of members, not their callings, so the calling of primary teacher is not reliant on that primary key or Doris's record number. So I think we're in good shape here with this one. Now let's look at another entity, the ward. So let's put one on here. We'll call it ward. And we only have the name of the ward here in our data, and that's about it. But realize we could have other attributes like what the boundaries of the ward are, or the date the ward was first organized, etc., that could belong to that entity ward. But for now, let's go ahead and just make sure it has a primary key. There's probably a real unique key for wards in real life, but I'm not sure what that is, so we'll just leave it as that. And we'll go ahead and put the ward name in there. All right. Now, let's look at the relationship between these two tables. How does the entity members relate to the entity wards? Wards can have many members in them, and the members belong to one ward. So we have a one-to-many relationship here, with the many part being belonging to the members. So we click on members first. The ward has many members. Members belong to one ward. This establishes the relationship link between the two tables. Workbench automatically placed the foreign key there from this table onto the many side of the relationship. All right, what other entities do we have? Right next to the members data in the file, we have mission information. The mission name and the start and end date of when that member was on their mission. So let's start with an entity called mission. Let's give it a primary key of mission ID and the name of the mission. Okay, the start and end dates aren't the start and end dates of the mission itself, but of the member's mission. So let's leave the mission table like this for now. What is the relationship between the mission table and the members table? Missions can have many members who go on that mission. And at first thought you might say, and the members can only go on one mission. So that would be a one-to-many. So you're saying missions can have many members that serve there, and each member serves one mission. But if you think about it, members can go on many missions. You could go on a mission when you're 18 or 19, and then again when you're older. So we really have a many-to-many relationship here. And what has to happen with the many-to-many relationship? We need a linking table to resolve that into two one-to-many relationships. So we're going to choose the many-to-many tool. Doesn't matter which one we click on first, and we will get this linking table between them. So Workbench will automatically create that for us. And you'll see that the two primary keys from both tables are then used as the composite key that will uniquely identify each row of this linking table. In this case, it's two foreign keys becoming a composite key that's acting as the primary key. Two columns together that will uniquely identify each row. We can also rename the table if we'd like, so we might just put, member mission or something like that. Don't have to leave it as the default. And we'll just come down here. All right, so now that we have this new table, where do you think that the dates, the beginning and ending date of the mission are going to go? If the mission table right here contained those dates, and we put them at a column about beginning date and ending date here, it would say that every mission in the church, okay, let me back up there. If we were to put the beginning and ending date in the mission table, it's saying the beginning and ending date of that mission, like when was that mission created and when did it end. So it's not really the beginning and ending date that fits there. Things like maybe the boundaries of that mission or something like that might fit in there, or when did it first start. But these dates up here in our data are actually dates that go with Doris and Jared's actual mission. So we know it doesn't go there. If we look at putting those two dates in the members table, there is a possibility of repeating columns with two or more beginning dates and two or more ending dates in the same table if they had gone on more than one mission. And when we talk about normal forms, we see that this will violate first normal form with repeating data columns or attribute values. So we know it doesn't go inside of the members table. But if we look at the linking table, each row will be a unique mission linking one member to one mission. So we could add the beginning and ending date to this one. So go ahead and do that. And that will be date. Okay, this is a good example of second normal form. We can check our second normal form here. Each attribute that isn't part of the primary key, does that have to do does it have to relate to both parts of the composite primary key? So the beginning and the end date of our mission will only fit with that member on that mission. Yes, both columns definitely go with the entire composite primary key, so that is the right place for those two dates there. All right, next we have different callings. We have callings of the different members here in our data table. So I'm going to make another table here. I'm going to call it calling. Give it a primary key and the name of the calling. For example, the values for this data table would, or attribute, would be later, it would be something like Relief Society President, or in our case, it's primary teacher, or Elders Quorum First Counselor for Jared. And in our example, each member has one calling. So we could have a one-to-one relationship. One member has one calling, and one calling would only have one member. But since we already started with the multiple callings, we could continue that with the callings here as well. Members could have many callings over time, or even two callings at the same time. And then each calling could have many different members. So let's try that one. Let's just put a many to many here. And we would get a linking table between the two. And we can see that come up with the composite key coming in. And really, if we start with that logic, we could have had a many-to-many relationship between member and wards as well, because members can belong to many wards over time, and wards could have many members. So these are types of questions that we'd have to ask those who need this database. Is this database going to keep track of a member at a single point in their life, or do we want to keep track of all the past history data of each member? So for now, let's just say members can have more than one calling at a time. We'll kind of stay a little true to our data here, and we know that this can happen. Let's assume that any given calling then only has one member as well that has that calling. If we did realize that we needed to keep historical accounts of every calling of every member throughout their lifetime, we could try to leave it as this many-to-many relationship here with the linking table. And we could then add like beginning and end dates here as well, like we did for the missions. But for now, let's stay true to our data in the spreadsheet, and I'm going to delete out that table here. And we're going to just assume that maybe Doris could be a ministering sister and a primary teacher at the same time, but each one of those callings, ministering sister or primary teacher, we'll just leave it at one there. So let's try a one-to-many relationship with the many portion being on the callings. And then each individual calling in the ward would have one member that would do that calling. All right, so notice again how the foreign keys came in with the callings there. Okay, next calling in the spreadsheet is the name of the organization. And I can assume from how they have it here that they are talking about the organizations of the callings, not the organization that the member belongs to. For example, Doris's calling says primary teacher, so the organization of primary belongs to her calling. Doris is probably a member of the Relief Society herself, though. We can actually use the organization table later to relate each member as well as their callings. We'll call this entity, this new one, we'll call it organization. We'll add organization ID and the organization's name. And we could also add attributes here like the description of each organization, the age range of the people in that organization. For example, primaries are ages 18 months to 11 years. Relief Society is 18 years and older. But we'll leave it for now like this. This type of data is what we would call a lookup table. There are only going to be so many organizations in the church, like Elders Quorum, Relief Society, Primary. So there's going to be a set number of rows in this type of table. So what's the relationship between the organization and the calling? Each organization has many callings, and each calling belongs to one organization. So we have a one-to-many, with the many part of a relationship being on callings. Again, notice the foreign key that will then relate those two tables together. While we're here, I could also relate the members to the organization they belong to. This demonstrates the beauty of relational databases. Not only do members have callings that belong to organizations, they themselves belong to organizations. So look at the relationship between the members and the organizations. Members belong to one organization. For example, Doris is a member of the Relief Society and Jared belongs to the Elders Quorum. But organizations can have many members. So it is a one-to-many relationship with the many portion being on members. So we get a foreign key relationship again here. All right, since there is a set number of organizations, we just have put the name of the organization that the person belonged to as an attribute in this members table. This could also be true for the callings table as well. We could eliminate the organization table altogether and just add an attribute. So what I'm saying is, why couldn't we have just come in here and add an attribute of organization here, and then we would just put that value with the members' data in that table. And I don't want to do that, so I'm going to take that off. But that's what I'm asking here. The calling table would have the field or column of organization, and the member table would have the field of organization. And maybe that would have been okay, but it just depends on what the output of the database what the data that they need for the users are. So here's a classic case of entity versus attribute. Do we make a whole new entity called organizations, or just use as an attribute with the name organization that have different values inside here? Or do we make a new lookup table that contains each organization as a row in the table like we have here? Again, these are decisions you have to make as you're designing the database. In the future, what if Relief Society changed its name to Adult Women Group? Then it would have been easier to just change the name in the lookup table and not in the members table or maybe the callings table that you might have put it in. Or if you think about that, you could have just run a mass update in both tables later to change all the text values in there. But I like the way we have it here because I can relate two different tables to the same entity without having to place the same type of attribute twice in two different tables. As we build queries later, you will see additional benefits to more detailed queries that you can run on the data as well, depending on how you design your tables here. So let's leave it this way for now. All right, we're getting there. So now we just have a list of ordinances that Doris and Jared have received or haven't received yet. Again, we have the choice here. Should these be attributes of the member entity? So we could go in here and we could put something like baptism and blessing in here as actual attributes in here. We could give them each the date, and that would be their value. If they had a date, then they'd had their attribute or their ordinance done, and we'd leave that null so that if it's null, then we know that it hadn't happened. Like we have some NAs, not applicables up here. Is that maybe how you want to do that? That might work, but what if later you find out that you want to record what location that blessing or baptism happened, or who were the witnesses of those ordinances, or what temple were they sealed in, things like that. Then the date isn't enough information to just be one value in the members table. So for our example, it might be, however, because we really only had the date on the spreadsheet, but for argument's sake, let's just say our database users needed to have maybe additional information, or they thought they might need additional information later. So we're going to make an ordinance table. And I'm going to leave the primary key of ordinance ID, the name of the ordinance. Maybe we'll shorten that one down a little bit. Okay. And we'll require that. All right, let's leave it there for now. So what is now the relationship between members and ordinances? Members can receive many ordinances, and ordinances can be given to many people. So again, we have, let me make some room here, we're getting big. We have a many to many, and we get a linking table here. And this is where I would then put the date of the ordinance. And then, of course, if you wanted the location and the witnesses and whatever, would also go in this location. So again, for that member and that ordination, this was the date. So that's a good place for that one. There are also only so many different ordinances in the church. So there's going to be a set number of rows for this table as well. So like a lookup table. I'm sorry, for ordinances, that's what I meant over here. But this linking table could be pretty huge with all the members associated with all of their ordinances. Okay, so this is the lookup table, the small lookup table, the ordinances one. So we can see how crazy keeping track of just one member and all that is associated with them in the church can be. We could have expanded this even further to mission presidents that go with the missions, bishops to the wards, temples to the ordinances. We could have gotten really huge with lots of different entities. It just all depends on what the organization needs to keep track of. But this was a good start, and remember, it's not set in stone. We can come back and alter the design if we need to, but it is easier to alter it now before we start putting the actual data into each of the entity tables. So there we have a few ways to look at entities and their relationships, and if we want certain data to be in their own entities or if they are just attributes of an entity, we can decide that as we design. We can also see how separating out the entities goes hand in hand with normalizing our data.